All right, folks, it's 9:30, but before we get started, I'm just going to turn over the chair to our chair, Lori Pratt.
Thank you, Chair McMahon. Just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge a tireless public servant that we lost yesterday in the District of Sechelt. Mike Shanks was first elected as a councillor in 1986, served for 23 years under 7 mayors, and he's always been a steadfast member of the community, and just wanted to take a moment to just acknowledge the tireless years of service that he gave to our community and how much he'll be missed. Very kind man, lots of lovely things. He's always been very approachable, and he will very much be missed. So just wanted to take that moment.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. I would like to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. Today is Tuesday, December the 3rd. It is the Special Infrastructure Services Committee amended agenda. First, I would like a motion to adopt the amended agenda. Second, thank you. I have some changes I'd like to make to this agenda. If we can take item, right after item 2, if we could add in Kylie Hutchinson from TRAC for a very brief presentation. So that, I guess, is 2A. And is there any other changes? New business? Excitement? No? Seeing none, all in favor of the amended agenda? Thank you. All right. I think first up, we will, first, I think we will receive all of our reports. Can I have a motion to receive everything? Councillor Pratt.
Also known as Director. Can we amend that to also accept the communications at the same time, as this is a very specific topic today?
I'm told there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but...
There is not.
What the heck? Can we receive all reports and communications? I'm sorry, folks. I'm very tired today, so I'm just running on one cylinder. I see a motion. I see a seconder. All in favor? Thank you very much. Now we can proceed. And if I could invite up Maureen Nelson and Rowan Moore from Elphinstone Secondary School. Please come up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Mari, and I'm in grade 12 at Elphinstone Secondary School.
Hello, I'm Rowan. I'm in grade 11, and I go to Elphinstone Secondary School as well.
We're here today to present the board with 367 signatures from students and families all over the coast asking for free transit passes for students. For the month of November, myself and a number of Elphian Chat students have been collecting signatures from our classmates to support this initiative.
As students ourselves, we believe that giving students free bus passes is important for several reasons. The first being, as young people, we are really concerned about climate change, and we believe it will impact our future. And encouraging more students to take transit will reduce the amount of greenhouse gases from having our parents drive us around everywhere. Also, it may help to get more students adjusted to living car-free from a young age. It can be encouraging there.
Another reason that free access to transit will give us more freedom and opportunity to attend after-school activities such as sports, arts, employment, or volunteering.
Personally, I take the public bus to school most mornings. It's much more convenient than the school bus timing, and I know several dozen students from Sechelt and other areas who take the public bus instead of the school bus. We all have to pay $2 and sometimes $4 just to get to school every day. And especially for marginalized families, I think it would be a big plus to encourage free transit.
So it's no secret that as high school students get older, it's possible that they attend parties where alcohol and drugs are present. The use of transit in these situations earlier in life makes our Sunshine Coast roads safer at night and reinforces safe habits that students will hopefully carry on throughout their lives.
Those who struggle to afford a car or bus passes would benefit greatly from this initiative, and it may even help some families move to being one car if their child or children could take the bus for free.
As our school district grows and evolves, there are more and more alternative education programs that often take place during times when school buses aren't running. Free bus passes for students would help kids attend these programs to receive their education. So that's all we have for you right now, but before we finish, we would just like to thank you for having us and apologize if we have to leave early to get back to school. And now I'd like to pass it over to the organization that assisted us with this campaign.
Thank you. My name is Kylie Hutchinson, and I'm a board member with Transportation Choices Sunshine Coast. And TRAC is a member-based organization that has been working for the past 8 years to create sustainable transportation alternatives on the Sunshine Coast. And it's been our pleasure to support these students in their goal for a free transit pass. I'm also myself delivering 351 signatures from a separate petition that we ourselves conducted. And from our perspective, there's several reasons why we think that there are many benefits to having free bus passes for students on the Sunshine Coast. So it's known that climate change and resiliency is already a strategic focus of the SCRD strategic plan. And compared to many climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies for municipal and regional governments, free bus passes are a relatively low-hanging fruit. They're an immediate, cost-effective, and relatively easy strategy to implement. Free bus passes can build early sustainable transportation habits that develop youth into lifelong transit users. And very interestingly, research has shown that free bus passes can improve the entire transit system overall. So in the city of Kingston, for example, free student access, what it did was to transit, it increased demand, which over time necessitated increases and improvements in service frequency. And these improvements attracted other paying riders to the system, so that over a 4-year period, transit ridership in Kingston increased by 73%. Having more kids on transit would reduce congestion on Highway 1 and also outside of schools, because less parents would be dropping off and picking up their students. And less parents driving also means better air quality around our schools, which if you haven't been at a school at 3 o'clock, it's a significant issue for little lungs. Free bus passes also promote social equity among giving youth from lower income families the same opportunities for access and independence. So we know that other municipalities are currently exploring this, including Whistler, Powell River, Vancouver, and Victoria, to name a few. And so at TRAC, we believe that now is the time for the SCRD to show leadership on this issue that addresses so many needs in one basic initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before you leave, do the directors have any questions for the students or for Ms. Hutchinson? Director Hills.
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, and a question about for the students. When you use the BC Transit, what about in-school events? Do the teachers coordinate BC Transit? I'm just wondering how it's used within the school, how you see it has been used in your time as a student there.
Personally, what I mainly see is getting to and from school. So students will usually have to pay $4 if they're not living on a school bus route. And this SD46 provides buses, and usually there can be teachers who drive that for field trips. But I think that if free passes were implemented, there would be a higher usage of classes using the free transit.
Thank you. Director McLean, sorry.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. For the students, I noticed one thing you mentioned was the alternative education. So something that's important to me is that all students have access to the education that they need. Could you tell us a little bit more about the alternative education and what specifically they need when it comes to transportation, to the best of your knowledge?
Okay. Well, my mom teaches at the Spider program in Sechelt, and the hours for that are not, they don't follow the consistent school hours, so the school buses don't line up with that. So if students would like to attend, they have to either pay $2 or get a ride from their parents. And I know there are other alternative learning programs on the coast that would benefit from free transit passes.
Good. Director Pratt.
Maybe just to help Director McLean with some of the other programs, seeing as I do have a little bit of experience with the school district. There's also coast-wide programs such as concert band. There's the musical theater that those are programs that are set at Choteleach outside of school hours, and so then the students are from across the coast are welcome to attend. There's also things like sports, rugby, girls rugby is one that I can think of that Choteleach ran, soccer as well. They've done all across district joint teams that way, providing more opportunities any way possible for, there's a lot of outside the school calendar. There's also the potential for prior to the school day starting too, so, or after the.
Hey, Director Hills.
Thanks. So students, it goes from K to 12. So which students do you think are most likely to use the free transit service? Like what age would be an acceptable age to travel alone on BC Transit? What would you think?
Well, I think part of that is up to the parents and the students themselves, but I think there's definitely a wide range here. All high school students, definitely. And being only 2 high schools, it's definitely a main concern because it's harder to get to that high school than likely to have a closer elementary school. But in elementary school as well, anywhere from grade 5 to grade 7, depending on the parents, they could benefit from this as well, I think.
This also isn't just concerning students riding the school bus alone, it's also students who will be riding with their parents, so getting used to riding, or not the school bus, the public bus, getting used to riding the public bus and kind of developing a habit there. So I rode the public bus with my parents when I was 4, 5, 6, just anywhere up from there, and even as an infant. Yeah.
And I'm just going to say that I used to take the transit bus home from school starting in grade 5. So it worked fine, even over in dangerous urban areas like North Vancouver. Director Pratt.
I'd also like to add that there's, you had mentioned Spider, which of course is one program that would benefit because it is outside of the bricks and mortar schools of Choteleach and Elphinstone. There's also the Sunshine Coast Alternative School with sites in Sechelt and in Gibsons that the school district actually already purchases bus passes from the SCRD to give to those students because they are on different schedules. They're not on any kind of bus schedule, or school bus schedule, I should say. So there's a lot of that outreach that is already happening and then there's also the homeschool students that typically meet, I think, camping a couple of times a week, and something like that would be very helpful for them too. And then there's always the cross boundaries, such as the NEST students that go to the nature school up in Davis Bay and are not on any kind of school bus route.
All right, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your coming out. It's great to have youth's voice at the SCRD board, and we really enjoy hearing from you. So thank you very much. And if you leave the petition behind, I will entertain a motion to receive it. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. We will. 2 petitions. I beg your pardon. Well, Let's have a motion to receive the other one. Moved, seconded, all in favor. Yay, we're done. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Okay, next up on our agenda is Mr. Chris Gregory from BC Transit with a presentation. Okay.
I'm turning on the projector.
Okay.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for having us. So, as mentioned, my name is Christopher Gregory. I'm from BC Transit, and I work as a senior revenue advisor there, focusing on fare reviews around the province. So today I've come up to present to you some fare options related to the Sunshine Coast system. Before we get into things, I'd just like to take a chance to address some of oh, I'm sorry, I don't think we've got the right presentation loaded. Just a moment. I've got a copy, yes. Sorry about that. So just before we jump into the fare review itself, as mentioned, I'd like to just go through a few ridership considerations. As I understand, that is one of the primary goals of the regional district. So when we look at increasing ridership on board buses, there's kind of three key attributes we can consider. The first is the quality of service. So this is making it desirable for people to take transit. So we need to look at the frequency of their buses, the reliability, and service to either new or underserved areas. This tends to be one of the primary purposes that people switch to transit, or that keeps them off the buses currently. The second consideration are fares. So fares inherent to kind of attracting people as a result of decreasing the cost to ride transit. You may see an increase in ridership, although it's proven that the quality of service usually tends to be a larger draw to riding the bus. The third consideration is transportation demand management. So this is outside of BC Transit's scope, but this is a wider arching transportation plan that you'd see implemented around the region. So this includes things like parking fees, bus lanes, gas taxes. So this encourages or increases the desirability of transit while reducing the desirability of cars, encouraging that mode shift away from cars and onboard to buses. So a quick agenda for today for the fare review. I'm going to go through a brief overview of the process to this point, the BC Transit fare strategy that guides fare reviews around the province, the current fare structure, the Day Pass on Board program, the future of our fare collection on board the buses, also known as advanced fare collection, the current performance of your Sunshine Coast transit system, some local considerations, which will touch on the complementary transit previously discussed, some proposed fare options for the Sunshine Coast. We'll go through some next steps and then have some time for questions at the end. So when we look at BC Transit funding, conventional service is funded in a roughly 50-50 split between the province and the local government, in this case the Sunshine Coast Regional District. So that 50% that will come from the Sunshine Coast Regional District is usually made up of property taxes and then the offset by the fares collected on board the buses. We aim to complete fare reviews in each of our transit systems in a 3 to 5 year cycle, and your last fare change occurred in April 2016. So you're right on track for an update to your fare structure. I've also been engaged with your staff since late summer in developing this plan. So the BC Transit Fare Strategy, which guides all of our fare reviews around the province, is a document entitled Improving Yield, and it was developed with our partners around the province with the goal of increasing the net yield of our fare revenues. And it comes down to a few key objectives. Really what we're looking to do is make fare structures that are easy, simple to understand, streamline the process of purchasing, making sure that they're easy to collect these fares, and then addressing any issues with security of our revenues and fraudulent use. So as part of the BC Transit Fare Strategy comes recommended guidelines and pricing. So when we look at the Sunshine Coast's current fare structure, you're actually quite well aligned with the exception of a couple pricing. So the first one being that our recommendation for your day pass product would be $4 rather than the current $5. And your current discount monthly pass for students and seniors at $42 is a bit more of a discount than the recommended 15% off of your regular result. It also includes transfers currently, and in place of transfers, in each of the systems undergoing fare reviews, and currently in place in five of our current conventional systems, is the Day Pass on Board product. So the Day Pass on Board product is the next generation of our transfer system. This moves the day pass sales from vendor locations to onboard the bus, improving the convenience for our customers. As I mentioned, the recommended price for a day pass product is 2 times your base cash fare. So in this case, $4 for your day pass, which can either be purchased with cash or with 2 tickets. In the 5 other systems that we have seen the Day Pass on Board introduced, we've seen reduced conflicts between drivers and customers and increases in revenue and ridership, as customers appreciate the added convenience of the product. The Day Pass on Board program is also important to the Sunshine Coast as an important consideration for tourism around the region, and we've made considerations to make sure that we can get this product in place before next summer. Future fare collection technology, also known as advanced fare collection, is this next generation to the GFI fare boxes, which are currently on board the buses. With advanced fare collection, we'll bring the Bring Your Own Ticket platform, and in this case, we'll be looking to incorporate tap technology similar to what you have in your credit card. The RFP is currently ongoing, and considerations will be made to accommodate cash and other products in the conversion. When we look at performance of the Sunshine Coast transit system, impressively, the ridership and revenue in your region are both up, 8% to ridership over the last 3 years and 7% to total revenue. It's also important to note out that your revenue from prepaid fares, so that excludes cash, is actually up 1% from 3 years ago. And prepaid fares helps to show our stability and predictability in your fare revenues. So before we dive into the free transit discussions, I thought I'd quickly go over the free transit directions that we've received. So in September 2019, my understanding is that there was direction received to explore free transit for free or discounted youth transit, with the goal of increasing ridership. When we look to increase ridership on board our buses, of course the first consideration is that we need to make sure that there's capacity to accommodate those riders. We don't want to be offsetting or impacting the quality of service that we currently have. With free transit would come the loss of fare revenues from our youth, which still would require funding in part by the Sunshine Coast, as that is one of your funding revenue sources. Usually, free transit comes down to a couple primary goals of the local government. The first one being affordability. So we're looking to make it more affordable to live on the Sunshine Coast. And what we've seen in other regions are implementing of social programs, such as Victoria and Kamloops, who have targeted programs to target the less fortunate members of our society. The other consideration is environmental sustainability. And if the goal is to get cars off the road to encourage that mode shift onto transit buses, as mentioned, the quality of service usually tends to be more of a driver in encouraging people on board the bus and to leave their car at home. So the alternative would be to using the funding that would be necessary to fund free transit to improve the quality of your transit system. A couple transit systems around the region were brought up earlier. So one of the first ones we'll touch on specifically for BC Transit is the Victoria Regional Transit System. So recently the City of Victoria elected to pay the regional transit system, which is made up of 13 municipalities, to purchase youth passes to divvy out to their youth. So that's only within the city limits. It's not the entire region. They're also funding this through Sunday parking fees. So they've got alternative funding sources to offset the impacts of those lost revenues. It was also introduced without the recommended service considerations. So time will tell whether the service will be impacted. One of the other systems, and a bit of a unique one, is the Whistler Transit System. And they've approached transit in the region more holistically, or in that transportation demand management structure. They've got those alternative parking revenues in place. So as parking fees go up, transit fares go down. And they've also partnered with a number of local companies to offset the costs associated with offering free transit. These were also approved without the recommended service considerations. Outside of BC Transit and across Canada, there's two other systems I'd like to touch on. So the City of Kingston implemented free transit for youth, but the free transit for youth came second to building capacity within their system. So there were large system investments in not only buses, but hours. And by building this capacity, they were able to afford the purchase or the use of a free transit option after they built the capacity. So some of these alternative funding sources, they looked to school districts and some provincial sources which we don't have access to here in BC. TransLink, as part of the All On Board campaign, also looked into free transit, and the Mayor's Council ultimately rejected free transit for youth and low income as a result of funding considerations. So when we look at complementary fare analysis for youth, for fare for youth in the Sunshine Coast, we want to make sure that we're looking at the peak demands. So that's making sure that times around school bells are met. And we looked to automatic passenger counter data off the buses to estimate what the impacts fare-free transit might have. I'll mention that total cost is estimated, and funding partnerships for this type of system would need to be explored. So at a high level, we provided a range from a low to a high of what we could expect approximately. So on the low end, approximately 1,000 hours and one additional bus, and on the high end, 2 buses and 2,500 hours. The resulting impacts is an estimated loss of fare revenue of about $175,000, and increased costs of between $173,000 and $398,000, resulting in total system impacts of approximately $348,000 to $573,000. So some proposed fare options for the Sunshine Coast region. As mentioned, your fare structure is already quite well aligned currently to the advanced fare collection structures. So as the most incremental change, option 1 looks to reduce the cost of your day pass from $5 down to $4, removing transfers, and moving the sale of day passes from vendor locations to onboard the bus. Option 2 is an alternative to full free transit, in that we reduce the senior student monthly passes from the current $42 down to $30. And option 3 explores fare-free transit, which I'll touch on the impacts on the next slide. So for options 1 and 2, non-complementary options, we were expecting to see increases in revenue and ridership, noting that you'll see more revenue with option 1 compared to option 2, and the inverse of ridership, so more ridership in option 2 compared to 1. With the current service in the Sunshine Coast, it's expected that the current capacity on board the buses will accommodate the ridership in option 2. Within option 3, when we consider the additional buses and hours required, to maintain that quality of service. It's also important to touch on that the additional buses and hours need to be incorporated into the transit improvement process. So the transit improvement process, or TIPS for short, is an 18 to 24-month process which incorporates the signing of MOUs at the local level, procurement of the additional buses, and then securing of funding from our provincial partners in order to provide these additional buses and service to serve the expected increase in free youth ridership. So in summary, for timeline considerations, for our non-complementary fare options, that being options 1 and 2, your earliest implementation dates and our recommendation would be April 1st of 2020. That would allow us the time to procure the fare products, market out to your customers the proposed changes. For complementary fare options, so option 3, as mentioned, it's that transit improvement process. So it's a bit longer of a process, and we'd need 18 to 24 months before we could get those buses and hours in place. It would also require that we were working with our provincial partners to secure that funding, and so that TIPS process would begin this spring into the summer. So next steps in this process would be presenting this report to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Board, recommending option 1 or 2 for implementation in April 1st, 2020. Following approval would be a comprehensive marketing communications plan and then training of the operating company of the changes, including the removal of transfers and introduction of the Day Pass on Board program. So thank you for the time. I'll now open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I myself have oodles of questions. How are the other directors doing? All righty. Let's start with Director Ties.
Thank you for that presentation. My question is, the monthly passes don't seem to be getting a lot of uptake by the students, considering they're saying they're paying anywhere from $4 a day. So I'm wondering, where are they sold, and is there places where we can make it easier for people to access those monthly passes?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair. Yes, that was an interesting point earlier in that they're using cash fare products. If students are regularly using the bus, they can obviously look to monthly pass products as a way to reduce their cost per day. And if they're using the bus less frequently, the Day Pass on Board product would offer another alternative. Distribution of fare products like the monthly passes are handled by the local authorities. So my understanding is that there would be a number of vendor locations around the Sunshine Coast, and if there was an interest in expanding those vendor locations to potentially include locations closer to schools, that could be an option.
Director Hiltz.
Sure, thanks for the presentations. Elasticity and economics and why people behave in certain ways. I guess this is your business, kind of. That's
yes.
And so why would option 3 not be a recommendation from your point of view?
So right now, we're recommending options 1 and 2 because they're in place to get you an option in the near term. Option 3, if you are interested in pursuing it, it's just a more expensive option. So you'll have to come up with revenue sources to offset the lost fare revenues, and then inevitably, if the fare or the ridership increases, the increased cost to supply those buses, so the lease fees associated with the service hours, it's just a more expensive option compared to options 1 and 2. I also mentioned in the presentation that if the goal is to increase ridership, perhaps not directly targeting students, but ridership as a whole, that the quality of service is usually more of a draw for the entire population. So making sure that people can get to where they're going on time, that the bus is going to be showing up frequently, it's more of a draw in being able to leave that car at home rather than just eliminating the fares.
I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions. How many transfers are actually issued on the Sunshine Coast? And do you have any idea what percentage of the concession fares are seniors versus students?
So for transfer numbers, I don't have that number in front of me. When I looked at your system for the split of your monthly passes, sorry, I just have to find it here. What I came up with, and this would be unique users annually, so we saw that it was approximately a 50-50 split between your senior student monthly passes and your adult monthly passes. So roughly a 46-54. Oh, sorry,
No. How many of the concession passes are sold to seniors, and how many of them are sold to students?
Unfortunately, due to current data limitations, I wasn't able to come up with that number. If it's something that you'd be interested in, it's something we could try looking at and exploring, but I'm not sure whether we have the data granularity. Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry, that was all I had there.
Transfers.
And sorry, the transfers issue, it's not something I have with me today. But if it's something you're interested in, we can look at seeing if we can pull transfer counts within the Sunshine Coast.
I'd be interested to know because, frankly, I don't think very many transfers are issued on the Sunshine Coast. Director McLean, did you have a follow-up question to that?
So on the first part about seniors versus students, I think a different way of asking this question, which you may be better able to answer, is where did the $175,000 in lost revenue come from? Is that your estimation of how much students we have, or could you explain that number a little bit more?
Yes, so through the chair, when we build fare models for each of our systems, we take a look at what the product sales have been over the past few years. We take a look at some of your census data and then some APC data, and all of this comes together to build a model or an estimate of what we expect the revenues and ridership from the Sunshine Coast would look like, and in this case, in regards to youth.
So that $175,000 represents what you estimate to be all of the youth ridership currently.
Correct, with one caveat there that it also includes the estimated impacts that the Day Pass on Board program would bring, which in the other systems we've seen would result in increases to revenue and ridership. So it offsets a bit of that cost associated with free youth.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to ask, and I have asked this before, but I'll ask it again. Is there any hope that BC Transit will distinguish between students and seniors in your system so that we can collect useful data? Because on the Sunshine Coast right now, 50% of the population is over 55. So I'm guessing that a lot of our concession passes are actually sold to seniors.
Thank you for the question. First off, just to introduce myself, my name is Ryan Dennis. I'm the manager of sales and revenue with BC Transit, here to provide some support for Chris today. In terms of where we're going with our fare products and fare product mix, we probably will not look to differentiate the fare type itself. However, with our new advanced fare collection technology, we will be moving everything into a more mobile phone or account-based platform. So we will be getting some high-level demographic data out of that. So we would be able to get, like as Chris said, a bit more granular data for our users, which will help to inform these decisions a lot better moving forwards. We are currently developing the RFP for that program with the hopes that we'll be rolling out a pilot by the end of 2020 for it. And to the point on transfers, I can't speak to transfer usage. However, I know that this past summer there was the operational decision to introduce the use of colored transfers in different directions. So whereas previously one type of transfer was used all around the region throughout the day, for the routes that are heading in a single direction, one color was used in one direction and the other coming back. So that was actually kind of a half step that was taken by staff here at the Sunshine Coast to better improve adherence to the current transfer policy, and will actually move people more towards that Day Pass on Board program.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks. I'm looking at the option 2, and the monthly pass for adults is $60, and the proposed is $30. And in terms of BC Transit's guidelines, the monthly passes are at 20 to 30%, or 20 to 30 times the base rates. I'm wondering about that relationship between the monthly pass, adult, and the seniors pass, and the drivers for usage. Like I'm thinking if I was a parent and my kid had how can I make my costs less? So I'm wondering about, is there an advantage to lowering the adult pass to go more towards that 20 times rather than the 30 times? Comments on that?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So fares always come down to local considerations. And we give the guidelines of 20 to 30 times, knowing that the fares collected stay here locally within the Sunshine Coast to offset the municipal costs, your board costs, which are usually associated with property taxes. So it's absolutely a consideration that could be made. So I think your current cash fare being $2, you'd be looking kind of you're at the high end there at 60. If it's something you'd be interested in considering, it's absolutely an option to lower that $60 fare, knowing that it will reduce revenues and to a certain extent increase ridership. When we start drastically or reducing fares in multiple categories like that, we always have to consider capacity considerations on board the buses. So it's something I would have to discuss with our planning team to make sure that lowering not only just the discount monthly pass, but also the adult, that there would be enough capacity on your transit system.
So when you were talking about changing over the system, I have a Compass card for Vancouver. So is that the sort of thing that we're moving to here? Or would I have to have a smartphone with some app loaded on it?
Ideally, it is something where you would be using your smartphone. That said, we would have a product like the Compass card available. We're taking the approach that we don't want to have to support as much physical infrastructure as possible, because that is an added cost to providing that type of technology and service. So if we can create options where you bring your phone and use that as your fare or your credit or debit card, that is something that we are exploring as well. So you would have that option too.
Director Hills.
Increased net yield of fare revenues is the purpose of all this. And so it comes down to, it seems to be a philosophy, should public transit be paid by property tax or user fees? This seems to be the balance that we're talking about. And so what is the perspective of BC Transit in terms of should public transit be paid by property tax or user fees?
I think through the chair, our position is that to sustainably fund transit, we're not at a point now where property taxes can absorb all of that cost, especially if we're looking to improve and grow the transit system. The stability and predictability of having that revenue source through user fares enables the ability to continue to invest in the transit system. And what we've seen is improving the quality of service, improving the frequency of service is the primary way that you're going to get people out of using their personal vehicles for their transportation needs.
So that aspect of property tax, so is it desirable to not have property tax pay for it? Is that like that broader conversation of public transit? Is that?
I wouldn't go that far. I think it's obviously a balancing act, and we're here providing our understanding and our recommendations, but it's ultimately with the board to make those sorts of decisions. We're not at a place anywhere in the province where fare revenues and provincial contributions are solely funding transit. There always is going to be that property tax component. However, we want to help you to find that balance of what's acceptable for the taxpayers in the Sunshine Coast.
Okay, I have one about transfers. I love the idea, by the way, of selling the day pass on the bus. That just makes so much sense. Although I can't see why you couldn't sell it for $5, and then if a person has 2 tickets, they get it for 2 tickets, but never mind. When I was a student, I got a lift to school with my parents, and then I took the bus home every day. So if I was on the Sunshine Coast, that means that my $2 fare to get home would now be $4. So my fare would be doubled. And so I have to wonder why we can't implement the day passes on the bus and retain transfers for the people who need them.
Thank you for the question. So the transfers ultimately come down to an issue with the advanced fare collection technology, the next generation. There's also some considerations with the security and safety of our drivers. So transfers tend to be one of the main point of conflicts we see. For riders who still wish to purchase a cash fare, they still can take a single bus. It's just those riders who will be riding one way and then transferring onto another bus. So for those riders, as you were correct, they'd be looking to purchase that day pass product. And for riders who are regularly purchasing a day pass product or regularly riding the bus, they could look to products like the monthly pass for $30, which as a result, if you price it out with your cash fare, it's about 15 rides a month at that $2 cash.
Director McLean.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that sentiment with a bit of a comment. This is essentially doubling fares for some riders, the implementation of the day pass and removal of the transfers. For everyone on Route 2, Route 3, and Route 4, so everyone north of Seashelt, if they're coming down the coast and only going one way, their fare has now doubled if we make this decision. And that's a drastic change. I recognize that's not the majority of users. Majority of users will be making that two-way trip. But for some people, we are talking about doubling the fare. And that's something that gives me a lot of pause.
Yeah, I will echo that sentiment, by the way, just because, okay, my train just left the station. Over to staff.
The bus left the stop. I think for a lot of people, if I'm correct, your concern is that passengers who take Route 2 or 3, they can still buy a cash fare and for $2 and get to the ferry. So it's not that they...
I'd love clarification on that.
Yes, could we have that clarified? So if I come from Half Moon Bay and I'm trying to get to the ferry and I'm only going one way, will I have to pay $4 now instead of $2?
I'm sorry, may I clarify? From Half Moon Bay, your starting point, to the ferries, is it a single bus you would be riding, or you'd be transferring? So in that case, you'd purchase a day pass fare to board.
And you see, so we're doubling the fares for those people, and without any data telling me how many people are using transfers and where they live, I'm really reluctant to do that. I'm also curious, if we did a pilot program with free passes for students. We haven't looked at how that would work in terms of distributing the passes, whether that would go through the school district or how we would manage that. Over to Director Pratt.
Well, thank you for bringing up pilot project, because that's one of the things I'm curious about is have there been pilot projects across the province in other jurisdictions? What have they looked like? What are the parameters? I think our board was pretty clear that we wanted to see this implemented sooner rather than later. And if it's some kind of pilot project just to get us through till we decide on the other options, we don't have a lot of youth on the Sunshine Coast. It's 14.6 of our entire population is under the age of 19. So we're looking at 4,680 students according to 2018 data. And I can tell you a lot of them don't even live on bus routes. Like my children are, well, now that they're out of school, but they never were on a public bus route. We would have to drive them somewhere to catch a bus. There's a couple of things here. So the $175,000 in lost revenue, you said that was just primarily lost revenue or costs as well?
So the 175 was just the lost fare revenue.
Okay.
And then there was the additional piece of operational costs.
Okay, so based on a population of 4,680 people under age 19, that's 19 bus rides per year per youth under age 19. So that includes the kids that are not going to be riding it on their own, like the 0 to 9-year-old range, I'm going to say. I would be personally comfortable with my child when she was 10 riding with one of her older sisters on the bus. That's the kind of thing they did together. So that's 19 bus rides, the 175. So just extrapolating the data, trying to wrap my head around what this looks like. So back to the pilot project question. Has there been anything else around the province in regards to pilot projects? And what could that potentially look like here if we wanted to see something implemented before April 1st? Because the school year is almost over, and there's a lot of students that are currently in need now. If you could comment on that, please.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So through the chair, the two programs that are undergoing right now, actually, I'll correct that. The one program that's underway right now and the second program that's starting in the new year, the first being City of Victoria, is technically a pilot program. They have had it approved from the start of December until the end of August. So we've had 2 days and going on the third of that one being active. And then the second program is the one in Whistler, which starts in the new year. In terms of the administration of those programs, the City of Victoria has opted on the short-term basis to go with the use of regular monthly passes. And so they've arranged for those to be distributed through City Hall. That was at the cost of multiple tens of thousands of dollars worth of products for them to distribute. We have about a 19-week lead time to be able to get those products to you. So if that were the option to take, we would want to purchase additional monthly passes to get you the ones that you would need to distribute to students. The idea that they're working towards, and the one that Whistler is using, is to have a student ID that can be encoded with essentially access to our bus. It would act the same as a monthly pass. It would get run through the fare box. They have the capacity in Whistler to produce those passes in-house. So they've been able to work towards that solution for January 1st.
Director Pratt.
So the student ID card, like similar to what the students would receive in school, for example, my daughter in Victoria, she's going to university in Victoria, she gets it as part of her university pass, the same as my eldest did when she was in Calgary. So there's plenty of other jurisdictions that do like a photo ID pass at the same time of registration, at least within university and college students. I know when I attended high school in a city in Alberta for 6 months, and a number of my friends were getting, it was the same thing as it were if they were to have been in university or college, came as part of their ID card when they, so when they got their art school pictures done, that was all done at the same time. And it was just seamless at that time.
I think from understanding the City of Victoria's perspective, they didn't have that process set up and didn't have the scale that they could do up to 10,000 passes in-house. So they would have to look to an external vendor to do so. They didn't have an agreement in place, and to get this program in motion, they decided to go with the monthly pass route as opposed to going through an RFP process to acquire a vendor to be able to administer that type of program, and also set up the processes with the 3 school districts in the region that would need to, or that they would use to provide those passes.
So on a smaller, much less scalable basis, if we were to say, my guess would be like maximum about 500 students, around 500 students that would be, because I'm thinking the populations of Elphinstone and Chapel-Leach, and not necessarily all the students are going to be using those passes, as well as within the NEST program. I mean, we're looking at 500 to 1,000 students, would be my guess off the top of my head, that would be in need right now or using. And so when you're looking at that as a pilot, is that something that BC Transit has done before on that much smaller scale, or just the Victoria example?
It would just be the Victoria example at this moment.
Director Lee.
Not at all an expert on this, but I believe we pay for the school bus by students, and so therefore, if you were to fund the public transport, you the taxpayers would be paying double for those students.
That's not a question for transit, but it is a good question. one of the things that I wanted to know is what physically do we need? Do we need something like a compass card or a pass? And the reason I ask that is because my partner has one of the provincial passes that's good in BC Transit all across the province. Because the system here is not set up to take compass cards, all he does is flash it when he walks on the bus. So obviously the bus driver must be recording somehow that this person is walking on the bus with this pass. Are they? Or does this actually slide right under the radar of your fare counts?
I can't speak specifically to how things are administered here in that regards. However, I do know that we just in general have reliability issues with the data coming out of our fare boxes, which is why we're looking to update them. And adherence to pressing those keys is not necessarily as stringent as we might like across the province. So I wouldn't necessarily speak to that being the case here in the Sunshine Coast. But from a general sense, we can't necessarily guarantee that all those rides would be captured.
And I take it we also don't have any data on how ELFI students use the bus presently. I don't think it would help us to have the data on chat because the bus route recently changed. It moved, so that would be a confounding factor. But presumably you could track how many students get on and off right in front of ELFI and in front of Sunnycrest Mall to get some idea right now of what the impact of students on the transit system is. So do we have that data?
We do. So the options that Chris presented in terms of what the impacts would be for going to a free transit for youth program were pulled together in terms of the impact on what our ridership would look like. That was done using the automatic passenger counter data of people boarding and alighting the bus out in front of the school at bell times. So when we look at the frequency of people getting on and off the bus, we assume that we see an increase when we go to a fare-free type system. That's what was used to scale up the expected ridership, and then our planning and finance teams work to pull together what those impacts would be from a financial standpoint.
Thank you. Director McLean.
Yeah, so the lack of data seems to be a perpetual issue when we're trying to make a decision here, but I did hear one opportunity for collecting data there is that the automatic passenger counter. The rest of the table may know more about this, but I would love to hear what kind of data we can currently collect through that system.
Currently, it's just boardings and alightings. So there's a field that essentially you would walk through when you walk on the bus, and it would track someone coming on or coming off the bus. So we get a sense of what stops are being readily used and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Director Hills.
I'm going to come back to that, the transfer issue. Does option 1 and option 2 require that transfers be eliminated, or can we have the day pass and continue, like the day pass at $4 and continue with transfers as a stepwise process to collecting more data and understanding that? Is that a possibility?
We would not recommend having two systems running at the same time. And this also, as Chris mentioned before, ties into our philosophy with our advanced fare collection system. It won't support transfers when we move to that system. The idea will be you'll pay for a single ride or a day pass fare. The intent with standardizing our fare structures across the province is so that we can roll this out as seamlessly and cost effectively as possible. So you could maintain transfers in the time being, but before introducing that program, we would be coming back to have the same conversation around the day pass on board. And the recommendation would be that we introduce that program sooner than later so that customers get the sense of how to use their fares before we change their method of use and payment.
While I understand some of the benefits of rolling out a consistent product across the province, I have to point out that rural areas are significantly different than cities when it comes to our needs. And I am really reluctant to affect the people, most of whom are lower income, who are already in a transit-deprived environment, I guess I could say. And I'm not blaming BC Transit for that, by the way. It's very difficult to deliver transit service in this geographical environment. But to suddenly double their fares and lessen their options concerns me. I would also like to see some more information, and I apologize, I was going to review this before this meeting and I ran out of time, but where are we selling transit products? Like the vendor at Sunnycrest Mall closed. So where in Gibson's can you buy transit products these days? I'm not sure, but it seems to me that I remember in Vancouver that a lot of stores stopped selling them because there was insufficient margin on them. And I'm wondering if that's an issue here too, or how over to staff, bless you.
Thank you. Vendors, we nonstop are looking for new vendors to sell the products. The vendors are not earning any money by selling them. They're not getting a margin on the price or anything. The only reason why vendors are selling them is that they anticipate that by selling these passes, they attract more customers, and that those customers also buy other stuff when they're in the shop. So that's so we recently had at least a couple of vendors saying, "Yeah, I'm getting a lot of people in, but they're not buying anything else than my monthly pass. So it's more work for me than it's benefiting me economically." So they stopped on selling our products. So transit products. So we're continuing to look for new ones and including at the malls, etc. But it's not easy, and I think the day pass would help there.
Director Tais.
You mentioned earlier that we're looking to move to this, and that would probably make it easy to buy a monthly pass online and then just be able to flash your phone. Of course, that wouldn't be so easy for high school students who we don't necessarily want to encourage having a smartphone. Maybe they do nowadays, but up until the age of 12, it's been recommended that students should not have a smartphone. So I'm wondering if the schools might be a logical place to sell monthly passes and at a discounted rate, and so I think that might be a place to approach. And they're not in the business of making money, but they want to give their students some ways to get on the bus for cheaper.
I was just going to ask staff, do our recreation centers sell student passes, and do the senior centers?
Recreation centers, yes. Senior centers, I would have to confirm.
Director McLean.
I do have the list in front of me if people are interested, but I do have another question. I'm seeing a lot of yeses, so I am going to read through the list on the website. Day passes are available on the ferry, day pass only. In Seashelt, Petrocan, Mason Place and West Seashelt, and the pool. Wilson Creek, SCRD office, and the Shell gas station. Roberts Creek, the general store. Gibson's, Mike's Place, the town of Gibson's, Ladalai, which I guess is closed now, IGA in Gibson's, and the ice rink in Gibson's. And unless anyone else has a follow-up, I actually have a question. I'm just trying to understand our options a little bit. So looking at the transit improvement process, I understand that would be the major cause of a delayed implementation of free student passes. Did I hear correctly that some jurisdictions went ahead without considering service improvements? I recognize you probably wouldn't recommend that, but I think it could be an option that we go ahead without the service improvements. probably not best practices, but I do want to hear if some other jurisdictions did do that.
So through the chair, that's a great question. The two programs that are in place right now were introduced without any service considerations. So in the city of Victoria, the one benefit that the city of Victoria has is that most routes in the regional system do actually touch the city of Victoria, so they do have a lot of capacity and volume in general. However, as Chris may attest, his ride home outside of the city yesterday, he was passed up by 3 buses because they were full. Whistler, similar idea. They've introduced this program without any service considerations. I will share an example of Squamish. A few years ago, they expanded their free transit for kids from age 4, which it is currently here, up to age 12 without any service considerations. And we're leaving children on the side of the road. And it took about a year and a half for them to get an extra, through that TIPS process, to get an extra bus and service hours to expand to accommodate some of the demand around their middle and elementary schools there. So that is our major pause with this would be, do you want to potentially expose the risk of having children not able to get on the bus because it's too full?
Follow up?
Yep, I'm going to do 2 follow-ups. So first one is, how many pass-bys do we currently have? Do we have that information of full buses that don't pick up people on the coast?
Staff, please.
We don't have, I asked staff if we have the data. We don't have the data. Anecdotally, common times of the day and times in the year when pass-ups are happening are from and to the ferry, especially on the lower coast, from Gibsons and town of Gibsons area to the ferry and back. Especially if there are scouting groups and those kind of, then they can easily fill up 2 buses, and then the Route 1 and 90 is just chock-a-block full. So those are of concern, especially if they show up at school. Then very frequently students are not able to get up to school on the school during the early summer when school is still in, and early September. Other times when we sometimes have pass-ups is late Saturday night, especially the one from Gibsons back to Sheffield. That sometimes, and that can be the last bus. So we try to push as many people in the bus as possible, but sometimes we have safety limits on what it can carry. So that's another situation. So it's really ferry, back and from the ferry, and the late night buses that are really of concern.
I just want to say that as a frequent 257 passenger, I know all about how many people you can cram on the bus if you really try. So over to Councillor McLean.
Quick comment in that we need to, in future discussions about transit, keep an eye on that Saturday night bus. I think it is a problem of our late night service, particularly that a lot of it goes from Gibsons to Seashelt and not the other way around. So just something to keep an eye on moving forward. And back to our topic. So if we don't consider service impacts, could we implement the free transit for students much earlier than the 18 to 24 months? For example, potentially April as the other day product or the day pass change.
Through the chair, yes, you could.
The question I have here is, in all of this conversation, have we consulted School District 46? Staff lead?
Thank you. At the staff level, not. I know that there was a direction from the previous board for our chair and vice chair, chair and vice chair to connect with them. And so I'll leave it there.
On an elected level, yes. They're excited about the possibility. The school district purchases about $2,000 worth of bus passes a year, according to the chair. That's primarily for the Sunshine Coast Alternative School students. And we're looking at as many options until either board makes a decision, but from the conversations that our vice chair and myself had with the chair and the vice chair of the school district, we're willing and ready to do whatever we can to make this happen, to break down barriers for student travel. It's a great social equalizer on the coast, and when you're looking at these extended experiences that education is going into, for programs that are becoming more district programs, such as the ones I mentioned earlier, the extended, like with the NEST program, the drama piece, the musical theater, the band. It's really important for students to be able to get back and forth safely. We don't have roads that are very safe to walk or bike on. We don't have wide enough or bright enough to be safely sending your students home. So without being, the bus is a safe option, and whatever we can do to break down those barriers. So on an elected level, they're keen to see where we want to go with this and work with us.
Okay, and I'm guilty as chair of getting ahead of myself here. So I would like to wrap up with our guests from BC Transit. So are there any further questions for our guests? All right, Director Toth.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there's anywhere in the BC Transit system where you've uncoupled senior and student fares, and if so, could you share where?
Through the chair, currently our strategy is to reduce the number of fares, so we've been actually, in most cases, combining those fare types. This is just simply due to economies of scale that we get through producing the products. By reducing the product mix that we have, it costs us less, and then therefore costs our partners less.
Director Hiltz.
So I guess my question is about product mix. The semester pass and the U-Pass, if you could just, semester pass is a BC Transit, U-Pass is something else I don't quite understand. Are those even a possibility in our area here?
Through the chair, certainly. The U-Pass is generally a partnership with an entity, so in most cases it's with the post-secondary institution. So in Victoria we have 3 colleges and universities. Through that program, students are assessed a mandatory fee, so every student pays a really, really reduced rate. It's about 25% the cost of a monthly pass per month. And then everyone gets the benefit of that pass. A semester pass would be a 4-month term pass. Our pricing guidelines say it's about 80% of 4 times the cost of a monthly pass. But again, the pricing decision would be yours to make, and you could purchase that instead of purchasing 4 monthly passes.
Sure.
So U-Pass only is for post-secondary. It doesn't apply to K to 12.
We do have 2 schools in Victoria that have U-Pass programs in place, so it is an option. Again, the fee, these are both private schools because they have the ability to assess fees to students. So either a public school, and we had many conversations with the public schools in Victoria about putting a program like that in place, but it simply comes down to funding. The school districts do not have funding available to pay an annual fee per every student using the bus. However, these private schools do have the ability to assess fees and would offer that program. Effectively, the City of Victoria's program is set up like a U-Pass program. The city is paying an annual fee for every youth in the jurisdiction.
Director Pratt.
Just to speak to the way that transportation is funded with school districts. It's because transportation is not mandated within the School Act. School districts are given funding within the block, and it's called unique geographic factors, and that's how they assess their transportation funding. They used to have a separate transportation funding line item, and then a number of years ago it got put into the unique geographic factors. So, which is why there's it's school districts across the province fund and do transportation differently. Our particular school district uses a contract service. Other school districts happen to use happen to own their buses and do it all in-house. because I know that's one thing that Director Lee had asked about earlier, because you were concerned that we were double paying for transportation for students. So what happens is they get it within the block, and it's assessed by the province. So how much you get. But it's transportation to school is not mandated by the School Act. So school districts actually have to find it within their funding block.
Okay. Do we have any further questions for our guests? Director Ties.
So this is I've been hesitant to ask this question because it has nothing to do with fares, but since you're here, bike racks on our buses. Do we have any? Are we planning on, and how much would they cost? And when we're looking at mode shift, I think that's a big question. I'd like to talk about bike racks, but
For students.
yeah, well, also for students, for anyone, right? There's a lot of people that are now using all kinds of methods of transportation. E-bikes make ranges that were previously unthought of very possible, and especially in our rural environment, you can increase that radius of being able to draw into the bus if you have a bike rack with you. So yeah, I don't know if you guys are the right people to talk to that, but Remco probably is.
Or buses have bike racks, at least for two buses, for two bike.
And I'm going to jump in here and say that while I would really welcome that conversation at the Transportation Advisory Committee, I think that we had better stick to fares for students today, because we're going to be here for a while anyway. Over to Director Toth.
What kind of a lead time would you need if we wanted to implement something like a semester pass?
So through the chair, typically we order all of our fare products in June for the following year. So to not have to pay a very significant increase in the cost of those, you'd be looking at 2021. We could potentially order them in the shorter term and have them available in line with an April 1st introduction. However, the cost, and it's simply just due to the supplier's production costs, would be considerably higher than if they were part of our annual fare project order.
Director McLean.
Okay. If we implement a student pass and ridership increases significantly, would we receive further funding from BC Transit for your 46% of the share due to that increased ridership, or am I understanding the funding?
So through the chair, through our TIPS process, the Sunshine Coast Regional District sets how much funding they would be willing to commit on a yearly basis, and BC Transit takes that request, goes to the province, and then the province would match that funding amount. So there wouldn't be necessarily any increase on the BC Transit side without commitment by the Sunshine Coast Regional District to pay up to a certain amount of their share.
And I'm assuming this $75,000 in lost revenue does not count as increased paid, if my accounting.
Correct.
Yeah.
The idea would be that lost revenue would need to be made up through another funding source on the half of the Sunshine Coast Regional District, most likely property taxes.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Director Pratt.
Okay. So I'm thinking about, we have rebate programs. And what would there be to stop us for doing something like something similar but in transit, that we have a certain amount that we set aside in the budget through our budget process, saying, look, we're just going to provide 250, 500, 750 free passes to students for 6 months to get them through to the end of the school year, see what the uptake is, and do it as part of a budget proposal. And maybe that's a question for staff. And we can park that one for maybe later if you'd like, but
Yeah, I would appreciate it if we could park that question because we still have a report from staff coming forward. So any further questions for our BC Transit guests who came here by bus, right?
It was a long trip.
It is, isn't it?
Okay. Director Todd.
All right, just a quick question then. The question was raised about bike racks, but what about bike lockers? Would that be a responsibility of BC Transit, or is that's us? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Director Hills.
The fare box piece. So it's coming whether this area wants it or not. This area can't say we don't want these fare box changes. So it's coming. Is that?
Through the chair, yes. Our board of directors has approved the new fare technology as what we call base bus. So every bus in the province in a conventional system would receive it.
So when are all our buses base buses? Like, is there a deadline when this has to happen for the regional district?
Through the chair, that's not entirely clear at this point. As I mentioned earlier, we're still, to take a step back, we had gone through an RFP process last spring. And then this past fall, because of the way the market had changed, we actually realized that we weren't necessarily as ambitious as we could have been. So we folded that process and are starting again. We should have a selected vendor by the fall of this year, at which point we would have an idea of what the implementation plan would be. It'll most likely start out with a 6-month or so pilot program in one system and then be introduced at all of our remaining systems. The one benefit here is that we are getting the real-time capabilities on the buses in advance of the fare technology. So the actual introduction of the fare technology itself is a pretty seamless process from a technology standpoint. However, we are very conscious of the fact that this is really a change management project in a lot of ways for both staff, but primarily for customers as well.
I'll just ask, does this have any implication with the next bus system, or is that separate?
It's a good question. It's all a part of the same technology strategy on the board. So the Next Bus or Next Ride system puts some of the infrastructure on the bus that then we can utilize with the new fare collection technology. So the router and that sort of thing that you would use for the wireless signal, the fare technology would just happen to that. So as I mentioned, it would be easier with that Next Ride technology on board to introduce the fare technology.
I'll just say that we really need that here. I mean, the rural areas need Next Ride badly, much more so than the urban areas. And I have lots of people asking me, when can we get it? So, do we have any further question, directors? All righty. Thank you very much for being in the hot seat here with us today. And I think I will move next over to... Did we want a short break? 5-minute break? All right. Thanks, folks. 5 minutes. School is back in again. This is only day one of a 4-day extravaganza here at the SCRD, and we're already getting punchy. So, next up, could we have our General Manager of Infrastructure Services present his report on the fare review results? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief, given that a significant amount of information in this report is already discussed prior. One thing to add to the discussion to date is that in terms of the calculation of the expenditures of the cost to option 2 and 3, the low and high options, those are only the shareable costs we have for BC Transit. We have a portion of the cost that we fund ourselves through taxation of running a system. In general, those costs are about 20%, so there should be about 20% extra cost expenditures made in order to keep the service level and implement option 3 based on our current predictions. And depending on the system chosen, there is also no cost estimate yet included on what it costs to develop and implement and administrate a program on any kind of program. And it will be really dependent on the type of system, how labor intensive it is. I know, for example, that the system they are implementing in Victoria is require quite some additional staff resources, and is actually very sensitive to fraud at the moment. So they're trying to address some issues they are having there at the moment. The other thing I would like to note is that staff are more than willing to have discussion with the board on the potential implementation of any option the board would like to consider. I'm willing to have the open and frank discussion about what is possible and what are the implications of if you would like to go in one or the other direction. Thank you.
All right, folks. We are obviously a little baffled here because there are so many options. And I think there is an appetite here to try to bring in some sort of a program, ASAP, not 2 years from now. Director Tyres.
All right. Here are my ruminations. First of all, thank you, everybody, for looking into the options and the possibilities. It seems that there's a distinct lack of relevant data as to what the true impact will be. I'm thinking, okay, well, we've got Elfie and Chattelich together with 900 students or so. Ish. Yeah. Nest program, another 50. Alternative school, and the Spider program. So we're looking at 1,000 students, half of which maybe might be interested in having a free bus pass. So that's about 500 students. I don't see that being a huge impact on our ridership, to be honest. That being said, I also believe that getting from A to B is never free, whether you're walking or you're riding a bike or you've got to invest in something, whether it's shoes, time, or a bike, or so. To get somebody for free from A to B, I think, is also not necessarily something that's realistic or should be encouraged. I think it also takes away from other mode shifts, like riding your bike. If you want to save a couple bucks, you hop on your bike, and that incentive gets taken away as well. So difficult for me. I'm thinking I'm sort of on the fence between option 2 and then also the just saying, well, let's give it a go and just hand out some free passes at Chat, Elfie, and some of the schools and see what the impact truly is. Make it a bit of a trial run, but as I said, I don't know. Transportation ultimately is never free and shouldn't be.
Director Pratt.
It's difficult to assess what the need is when we don't have the data and knowing what the uptake would be, which is why the concept of the rebate program kept on coming in my head. We didn't know, when we did our water rebates, how many people would actually do an uptake on it, and certain certain things go through cycles. We know that there's a need right now. We've heard that from the community. We don't know how many that need, like even with all the signatures we had, the 367 students, maybe not all 367 students are going to need a bus pass. So, but they're in support of the program. They'd like to see it. I think and this is a question probably for staff, is how we can implement an X number of free bus passes for a pilot period of time to actually gather the data and see what the uptake is. And we can work, with the school district. And then, of course, there's a number of homeschooled students that wouldn't necessarily be within those the bricks and mortar walls. But I mean, I'm looking at the thinking round number of 500, like I said before, and agreeing with Director Ties. It's let's start somewhere and see what the uptake is. Put some resources, towards it, and go from there.
I'm just going to go over to staff here because what are our timelines on this? I mean, I don't think that we are going to make a comprehensive decision today. I don't think that we have the information yet. Ms. Perel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think just from a matter of process might be helpful. From a process perspective, there are a few steps, even if you'd want to implement a pilot program, that would have to be factored in. So such things as bylaw amendments. There will be implications potentially to the annual operating agreement with BC Transit because, of course, one of the factors in that agreement is our fare revenue to offset some of our expenditures. So I think if there was a willingness of the committee to put forward a recommendation to staff to put forward some options similar to whether it's a rebate program, a pilot program, et cetera, and how we can implement that. Those are things that we could potentially, but again, we'd have to consult with probably SD 46. We would have to consult with BC Transit as well, just as far as the actual fare product. One of the things that comes to mind for me is from an administration factor, the BC Ferries program for students and how we probably as staff collectively undervalued the administrative time it took to do those things. So those would be some factors that the staff report would articulate. That I think could be drafted pretty soon and probably in time before budget adoption. As far as implementation goes, I think we would have to just see what that would look like.
Just a minute. I had one other question too. Is there a way that we can design this program so that we can directly track the uptake of the students rather than just base it on more ridership, if you see what I mean?
I think that's one of the questions that we would need to work out. And one of the issues I see there is that, as earlier discussed, even City of Victoria is not able to track it. The actual usage, they're only tracking the amount of passes they give out. They're not actually able to track the usage itself. And it would be impossible for our drivers to ask every student that jumps on the bus, what's your age, and if did you pay for that card or not? So I'm thinking about the question as we speak, as I'm speaking about how can I actually implement a tracking mechanism here.
Okay, then that will be a question. Director Pratt, then Ties, then McLean.
Okay, so a couple of questions to staff. The first one is, can you clarify what bylaw amendments we would have to do? And the second question is regarding The tracking for a pilot project, could it not just be done at the point, I'm going to say point of sale, even though it's not point of sale, but it's point of the school contact. So if you could clarify the bylaw amendments, and then why the tracking can't be done if we set an amount, this is how many we're giving out, and then just track how many actually are taken up out of that amount.
Staff, please.
I'm referring to the bylaw piece to our CFO on terms of tracking. Yes, we can track the sale or how much we give out, but not the actual usage. So it would still not be able to see which routes they're actually taking and what the additional impact is on the service delivery itself.
Follow-up?
Just to follow up to our GM's comment, could we not ask as part of the free pass, ask for a survey from them as part of getting that pass? What routes are you using, and getting the data directly from the user.
Staff, please.
Thank you for this question. I think this is one of the items that we would need to discuss internally to see what is operationally possible, and that can be part of a follow-up report.
Yes. Did CFO have a follow-up on the bylaw question?
Yeah, so anything related to fees and charges needs to be articulated in the fees and charges bylaw, so bylaw 626. So we would have to amend, so very similar to another example would be our garbage waivers for refuse collection. It's actually articulated in the bylaw. And then there's an accompanying procedure to that, so it's clear and transparent because this is a regional or function, except for area, it pays into it. So ensuring that people understand the fee recovery structure. So we'd have to do that.
Thank you. Director Tighe.
My concern is that if you make it free, everybody's going to run and get one, and only a fraction of people are actually going to use it. So I'm wondering if there should be some nominal fee to it, $10, $20 to initially get the pass, just so that those people that actually want to use it are going to use it.
Over to staff.
This is a follow-up on that remark. In speaking with people within the city of Victoria, it became clear that their current system is fraud sensitive because it's free. If it would have costed $5, it wouldn't have been that fraud sensitive, because now it's free. It's really fraud sensitive. So that's an issue to consider.
I think that's an excellent consideration. All right, Director McLean, you're next.
So in terms of implementation, my largest concern is that we are not replacing school bus trips. So particularly at Elphinstone, I know that public transit bus, right as school gets out, is quite busy. I've been stuck on it a couple times. So whatever system we design, we need to make sure that students take the school bus rather than transit. Otherwise, we run into that issue where people are double paying. Just in terms of solution, I think building off what Director Pratt has said, what I personally like to see is a random sample pilot. So pick 20% of students and say, here is this pass. Some will use it, some won't. And if they do use it, I really like that idea of they need to record their own usage. And that's a condition of using it somehow. I think the biggest problem we have here is the lack of data. This range of costs is way too large for me to be comfortable with. So if we want to implement something, we need a good, thorough pilot and a test of it. And I think the best way to do that is a random sample. The problem with that is it doesn't go to the people who need it most. And that is the true essence of a pilot. A pilot does not solve your issue. A pilot helps you understand. So that's a decision that we need to grapple with. Do we want to solve the need, or do we want to understand it so we can make a better decision as we go to solve the need more longer term? But my preferred method would be to understand it with that random sample provision.
Director Toth?
That's a good point for the short term that Director McLean brought up. I think longer term, we need to be looking at something like implementing a semester pass. I know there's talk about, fewer fare options and a more simplified system. And I think, personally speaking, I actually like option one that's been presented to us with the addition of a semester pass, a very distinct product for students that would have a small cost associated with it, which I think speaks a lot to what Director Ties was saying as well. I just wanted to throw that out there before I forgot what I was thinking.
I'm just going to toss in two comments. I appreciate staff's observation that a nominal fee is a good idea, and I would agree with that. I think that would be a good idea because that way people are serious when they uptake. The other thing I would like to know is if there is a way that we can involve youth in this project, in assessing needs, in evaluating the success. I'd like to get the students out there looking at this too. There's nothing stopping them from doing a survey of the students in the school, and perhaps the school district could encourage and support them to do that. But the more leadership they can take on this, the better. Do we have more questions or observations, Director McLean?
Just really quick comment on getting students involved. I don't think we've ever done this, but I have seen in other transit systems where you get somebody on the bus to do surveys as people are going on the bus. And I think that could be a great role for students to do, to really get that specific information of who's riding the bus in order to build their case for this free transit. It's super person intensive, so we need volunteers to do it though.
Staff have a comment on it?
What I'm hearing is the idea about more of a demand analysis. How big is the demand for youth traffic, youth transit on the coast from the people that are currently riding the bus, as well as from the students that are currently not riding the bus. And I think it's very appropriate in this era for our staff to work with students, for example, the ones that are here and their peers to see if we can implement, and school district, to see if we can develop something in upcoming half year, and then report back out on, okay, what is actually their needs, and what do they actually want, and when do they would like to take the bus, and how can some bus routes maybe be realigned at some times of the day to better accommodate where the students would like to be picked up instead of along Highway 1 of them, maybe on the side road. Those kind of issues.
Good suggestions. Director Pratt?
Yeah, and we have, there's a highly engaged district student leadership team within the school district that encompasses all the high schools. Student voice is really important to the school district. It'd be really easy to engage them on this, and it's something that came up in the conversations that I've had with the elected as well as the superintendent with the school district. So it's a matter of us just moving forward with an idea and bringing it to them, and I think it's going to be super easy to engage with them.
And this aligns with our strategic objective of collaboration. So, Director Ties.
Yeah, I personally like the idea of a school-wide survey, just to get the demand. I mean, it's a very easy way to get the audience, and those people that are passionate about getting that will be on that survey, and whether that's student-led, whether that's school district-led, I guess that's it'd be nice to have it student-led, absolutely. And I also think that approaching the school district to be vendors for monthly passes in the meantime would probably be a good idea.
Okay, so for the purposes of moving into budget, do we need to identify some parameters here, like there was discussion of option 1. I'm going to say right now that I am not liking the idea of removing transfers without some data on how many people would be affected by that. Staff, please.
In terms of process, the next round 2 would be the last moment to adopt any budget proposals for next year. What staff could do is work with BC Transit between now and the Infrastructure Services meeting of January, or the Corporate Administrative Services meeting in January, to see if we can, what kind of data are available, or what estimates can be made on how much would be the impact of people transferring from Route 2, 3, 4 on 90 and 91. So it's primarily going from north of Seashell to the ferry, what the impact would be, as well as connecting with the school district and youth council to see what the parameters could be on a demand analysis, and who could take the lead on that, if there would be any budget implications associated with that. For example, for the youth to help us out.
I'm hearing the need for a motion here, or perhaps 2 motions. Director Pratt.
And the potential of a pilot project as well within that? Okay. All right. I'd like to move that.
Good work.
I'm going to suggest a motion here that staff come back to us at the next infrastructure or corporate services meeting with an analysis of the impact of removing transfers on the system. Is that good enough? Do I see a seconder for that motion? Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? Good. We got a motion. All right. Next motion. Somebody want to take a crack at that one?
Okay. Now Remco will have to help because, okay, so that staff work with BC Transit and the school district to bring forward a pilot project. Is that what we were? Pilot project options in implementing a youth fare structure. Does this make sense? We're getting there? And now I'm lost.
Is that sufficient, or does staff need more specificity?
I think it is sufficient. What I would like to add to it is the question, is it free transit? Is it at a reduced rate? Some of those parameters that have been discussed here this morning would be useful to see if there's any, so that we can at least identify, that we have a little bit more context. What I think is important to note is that the experience with pilots, especially on BC Transit, is once you start a pilot, it's very hard to to undo the pilot. So that is I think something that's really relevant to consider. But we can, if there's some more guidance provided on what you're looking for in terms of parameters around a pilot for youth transit rates.
Youth transit rates based on a nominal / administrative fee. Does that make? That's what I'm hearing.
Tracy, how are we doing? We're good? All right. Director McLean? Do we have a seconder for that motion? Or do we want to hear the motion first? Let's hear the motion first.
I have one question. It could be considered by the board to remove the word pilot.
Let's hear the motion first.
That staff work with BC Transit and School District 46 to bring forward a pilot project for youth transit rates based on a nominal rate structure and the options for implementation.
Okay, I think that would be a nominal fee. And does the mover wish to remove the word pilot? Perhaps we'll take out the word pilot. Staff?
Tracy, can you read it out once more?
That staff work with BC Transit and School District 46 to bring forward a pilot project for youth transit rates based on a nominal fee structure and options for implementation.
Staff, please.
Can I make a suggestion where you say options for a youth program with a nominal fee? Because essentially, it may not just be the financial implications, it's going to be multiple implications. So instead of the implications, financial implications at the end, just bring options for a program. Keep it broad because there's going to be other considerations.
I would actually suggest a youth fair program. All right. Let's determine what the motion is before we all leap in. Can we try this one more time?
That staff work with BC Transit and School District 46 to bring forward a youth transit fare program. I'm unsure whether you want to leave in based on a nominal fee structure and options for implementation.
Okay, do we have that moved? Are we happy with that? Okay, Director Hiltz.
The consistency with other policies that the regional district has. That's one of my concerns is if we just look at this independent from recreation versus solid waste versus what other program, so it's the consistency also. So the options need to have the consistency approach. That's what I'm...
Back to staff.
That's one of the things by the change by our CFO of changing it not only to financial but to broader implications. That's one of the items that we will consider.
All right. We have a motion. We do not have a seconder. Can I have a seconder? Okay. We have a seconder. Now we can discuss it. All right. Director McLean.
Thank you. I think that there should also be a discussion on timeline. The direction I got in talking with Director Seegers is that this should be done for next semester. So we're talking February. I think where we're heading is that's not going to be happening. So I want to make sure that we're all clear that we're probably heading for a September implementation at this rate based on the school calendar.
Well, in our immediate future, we're looking at budget this year. Are we? All right, back over to staff for help.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the considerations is going to be because BC Transit's fiscal is, and our annual operating agreement starts on April 1st. So we're always dealing with a dual timeline, which our fiscal is January to December. I think, of course, these are the things that we're going to have to consider because there's the fare product that I'm hearing from BC Transit and it needs to be considered. So what that fare product's going to look like, I think that's for us to determine. If it's a new fare product, then there is some lead time that needs to happen with that. So I think that, I don't know if we actually know of a timeline yet. I think that would be part of the things we'd have to contemplate in the report is how quickly could this be expedited. So, I mean, we could, friendly amendment to the recommendation is to add sort of with timeline implications. I mean, it's broad enough where I think that's just a given, but.
I think it's just a given, but I think the question was, when would the report come back?
January.
Okay, January. Director McLean.
Yeah, as a follow-up, I think it'd be valuable for the board to provide the direction. Are we okay with September, or do we want to push this thing through any earlier?
Director Pratt.
I'd like to see this in as soon as possible, so September is not an option for me. Any kind, as I've said through the discussion, whether or not it's, staff can come back with some of the suggestions as we've put them out here, like, hey, let's put 500 out there and see how it works with the school district, something like that. Do we need to do a whole new product fair? Like, how much do we need to do around that? I'm happy with leaving it broad. I'm not happy with leaving the timeline too long. I'd like to move as quickly as we can, and I recognize that we're asking for a lot, but it's a need within our community for the social structure of our community.
Staff, please.
In response to the question from Director McLean, I knew the name, but I want to say the director right. The point is, if we bring back a report in January, that would allow any potential required budget implications to be considered as part of round 2 budget. And depending on the option, I don't think that it will automatically mean that it will be September implementation. I think there are options that could be implemented earlier, but there might be some other consequences associated with that, and I think that's part of the report, is that we would outline the options and consider them more broadly.
I think we should really break in our new transit manager. What do you think? just throw the
Staff
word at
jumps in here, and I think the new transit manager will have a say in January. Thank you.
Director Hiltz.
In terms of the timeline, if my memory is correct, back in 2015, this board considered free student passes then, if that's what I recall, that it came through the board in the past. 2015, there is a report from it in 2015?
Over to Ms. Perot.
Yes, it has been contemplated, but it was further back. It was in around 2011, 2012. So it would have been the prior fair review. So not the 2015, 2016, but the one prior to that. So I believe that's also when some of the community services type of subsidization was also considered.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion on the table. Are we happy enough with it to actually, Director McLean?
So this goes to a larger philosophical discussion, which, we need to decide what is our goal with these changes. With the prices outlined here, I think we heard from BC Transit, a potential better investment is to invest in quality of service. The quality of our service isn't great. I think we need to continue to invest in it, and I want to make sure that that doesn't get taken off the table, that through the budget we do continue our Transit Future Plan. I'm really looking forward to Route 5 through Gibson's. I think that will be a very big game changer for our system. So we do need to continue to invest in transit, and I don't want this conversation to pull away from that. So that is a separate conversation. But the philosophical issue is, do we want to increase ridership, or do we want to serve young people? because I think if we want to increase ridership, there could be better ways to do it than focusing on young people. So I want to make sure that we all recognize that by making this decision to invest in young people, we are investing in young people. Ridership may increase a little bit, but there's other ways that we could look into to further increasing ridership for a more cost-effective manner. So just so we're all on the same page, this is a young people motion and investing in our young people.
Director Pratt?
Certainly. I appreciate the question or the comment, because that's one of the things I ask myself as well. You know, what is the purpose of doing this? It's not, it is, part of it does go down to increasing ridership, but it's also, it's changing how we view human travel on the Sunshine Coast as a whole. We're very clear that we need to reduce GHG emissions. We have a highway that is over-congested. We need to look at changing how we operate and getting people out of those single and double occupancy vehicles. You know, we need to do what we can, but we need to start where we're going to have the most impact, which is typically with our youth. Changing people behaviors as they get older it's difficult to do. So starting by changing those thought patterns younger, I think is great. Getting out of that, hey mom, can I have a ride to school, even though it's only 5 blocks away or 10 blocks away, or because a bus passes right past. So it's changing the mindset, and it's future forward. It's more than just about ridership. It's more than just about supporting youth. It's bigger picture and goals. It supports our youth, which is incredibly important, because they're often very much forgotten about on the coast, and they have no voice, they have no mechanism. So I think that this is part of the Transit Future Plan, which we will be discussing more in the spring, and we have more things that'll be coming up around that. But this is just one of those steps.
I'm also going to say that I think this is important, that we need to change our attitude towards transit. It's a considerable problem on the coast. If you consider the bus to be the loser cruiser, you don't want to take it. And I would be interested, not to staff, but if BC Transit has much experience in changing social perceptions of transit. And so if you have any observations to bring to us at some future time, I'd be really interested, because it's part of the problem. There is actually a stigma associated with taking transit on the Sunshine Coast, and we would like to start moving away from that. So, are we ready to... staff, please.
Sorry, you triggered something. What we're noticing at the staff level, especially what I hear back from drivers, directly and indirectly, is that the last several years we increased ridership significantly, primarily by increased service and being on time. On-time performance is the most, especially here on the coast, given that our frequency is not that high yet, and that a lot of bus stops, that's another issue. Bus shelter program, I know, it's coming, is important. On-time performance is key. If you have to wait 15 minutes or the bus just goes by and you're on time, but the bus already left, that's what's impacting people, because if the next bus is only an hour later, that's the key. So if we can increase the service to, let's say, half an hour or 50 minutes, people are way less, there are way less risk that if there's a pass up, that it's actually discouraging them from taking the bus next time as well.
Okay. Are we ready to call a question? I think we should actually. Yes. All in favor of this motion? Or request to read it out one more time.
That staff work with BC Transit and School District 46 to bring forward a report to the January 16th, 2020 Infrastructure Services Committee regarding youth transit fare program based on a nominal fee structure and options for implementation and timeline.
Staff, please.
The only amendment I would like to, I'm suggesting to that is infrastructure services or corporate administrative, because that's both in time for budget round 2. Thank you.
You could just say January committee service and just leave it vague.
I think that was the original suggestion, was January committee. Good call. Now, are we all happy? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much. Whew. All right. Over to staff.
I think there's one item that has not been captured in a resolution yet, and that's the demand analysis with students and the school district.
Director Pratt.
Should we put that in a motion? Recognizing the demand, and that staff bring.
How about?
School District 46 and Steve Peters.
Just a sec. Is TRAC interested in getting involved in this? She said, putting her on the spot. Yeah, in the demand analysis.
So, if I take off my volunteer hat, put my professional hat on, I'm actually the program coordinator, so I can definitely provide some guidelines and some ideas for how that demand analysis would actually.
Okay, right. Sorry. Over to staff.
A potential resolution could be like, and that staff work with SD46, the Youth Council, as well as TRAC to develop to assess a demand analysis for youth transit on the coast.
To assess the demand for youth transit on the Sunshine Coast. Do we have a motion that we are happy with? Okay, good. All right. All in favor? Passed. Thank you very much. Okay. Have we reached the end of this exhausting agenda? Do we have anything further that we have not covered off arising from this agenda? I think not. Excellent. Well, in that case, I'd like a motion to adjourn. Am I seeing this from Councillor McLean?
You know, I just want to make a quick comment. Sorry. I know. I just wanted to thanks for having me. I don't know when I'll be back. But I do want to reiterate, we do need to invest in further improving transit on the Sunshine Coast, particularly in the core. That is how we're going to shift our transportation. And I look forward to watching your discussions and maybe participating in them as the budget and the year moves forward.
And thank you for the editorial. Am I seeing a motion to adjourn? No?
Just a quick comment to Director McLean that yes, the connectivity is really key, including the connectivity up to Earls Cove, which will be an additional, we'll be just talking about later in the spring, okay? And motion to adjourn. And oh, no, sorry, Mark.
Director Hills.
Well, so in terms of the recommendations on that page 1 of the report, so we're not moving on any of these recommendations. The other motions that we've made are to supplant any decisions on options 1, 2, or 3. Is that how we're proceeding?
Anybody moving to adjourn? Oh, yes, I see a motion. I see a seconder. All in favor?